Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War breaking news update concerning the peace negotiations, these much discussed 28-point plan that the US and Russia have concocted and thrown at Zelenskyy and the Ukrainians. It's incredibly controversial. I'm not going to go into the details about the plan too much. I've already done that in several live streams and videos I've done. But I want to just give you some emerging responses, some extra information concerning it, and talk to you about and play you some of the responses, but talk to you about Trump's words concerning the 28-point peace plan and how he sees it, which I think is pretty extraordinary. So we'll move towards that towards the end of the video, but we'll start with a few emerging theories and ideas about the peace plan. So before we get there, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. That'd be really appreciated. It always helps out the channel. Right, let's get into the long weeds of this. So we're going to start with just a quick reminder. Ukraine is banned from NATO. Russia is readmitted to the G8. Territory is ceded. In fact, more territory than Russia has at the moment, and territory that they have struggled to be able to gain. Ukraine has to restrict the size of their army. All these concessions that Ukraine has to make, absolutely no concessions for Russia. We already know about this. This is the insane plan that the Americans have concocted, or the Trump administration, Steve Witkoff and others have concocted. Now, we understand that Trump's 28-point peace plan landed in Kyiv, and it gives Russia more than the Istanbul talks offered in 2022. So this is an interesting comparison whereby you had these the Istanbul Agreement, or Istanbul demands as they're kind of known. The idea that at the beginning of the war, Russia said, look, here's an agreement, you sign up to this, then that's all good and well. And that was rejected out of hand. Actually, this 28-point peace plan is even more generous to Russia than that. And that was rightfully dismissed out of hand. And actually, Russia are in a weaker position now, almost 4 years into the war, than they were then. Then they controlled, if you saw the maps, vastly more territory than they do now. They went back after the lightning counteroffensive that pushed the Russians right back, and then they've been creeping forward, but at a huge loss in personnel and equipment. And so Russia is in arguably a much weaker position now than they were right at the beginning of the war, and their demands are even more grandiose. So that's kind of weird, and these are demands that the US appears to agree with. We compared 3 peace plans to show how Russia's demands grew as its battlefield position weakened, said the Euromaidan press. That's not how negotiations usually work, and that's what's so bizarre about these demands, is that they appear to correlate with an actual weaker Russian position. Now, Trump's peace plan provides for 10-year security guarantees for Ukraine, but does not oblige the US to provide military support, according to Washington. So the plan also provides for cooperation between the US and Russia in the field of, I presume that's AI, energy, as well as the extraction of rare earth resources across in the Arctic. Now, this is incredible. I was talking earlier on today about how one of the few good points about the 28-point peace plan was that the security guarantees looked fairly robust, and it appeared that people understood them to indicate that the US would step in, similar to Article 5 of NATO, and help Ukraine out if it was invaded. Well, apparently that's not what is part of the plan. There is no obligation for the US to provide military support. So that weakens one of the only bright elements of the peace plan. So that's another negative. My goodness. Now, Caitlin Dornbos here says, I asked senior US officials a version of this question yesterday. What concessions from Putin has Witkov secured? So if you stack up all of the concessions in the 28 peace plan that Ukraine has to commit to, and then put that on one side of the table, on the other side of the table, you put all the concessions that Russia has to commit to, you'll find that there's only one column that has any information in. Russia has no concessions to make. So Caitlin Dornbos here put this question to US officials. This is a New York Post foreign policy and national security reporter. The answer, she says, was essentially that Putin's concession would mainly just be him abandoning his efforts to take all of Ukraine. She says a story to come. Well, this is something that happened previously, where we saw another iteration of this, an earlier form of this peace plan, however many months back, when the same thing was stated, that actually the concession, and I think maybe did Trump even say this himself at the time, that, hey, they've made a concession, and it might have been around the Alaska talks. They made a concession, and it's not to attack and try and take all of Ukraine. They can't do that. They're not in a position to. They can't even take the Donbass, for goodness sake. Like, they've tried for 4 years to take the Donbass, and they failed. So of course they're not going to take the whole of Ukraine. So that's not a concession. And I remember ranting about this previously. Well, if we are back to this position again, then the US, as I said this morning, has learnt nothing. And by the US, I mean the Trump administration. They've learnt absolutely nothing. And they are trying to just throw the same things out at Ukraine as were previously posited. Now, Jimmy Rushton, the security analyst from Kyiv at the moment, says, I spoke to a senior member of the State Department yesterday after the Witkov-Dmitriev pact was leaked, sending them the document and asking them if it was genuine. Their reaction, this is the first time any of us have seen this. The document was later confirmed as genuine. Right, and we're going to get onto this whole Google Translate thing in a second. Essentially, if we try and make sense of all the data, it appears that Witkov has been handed a peace plan by the Russians. Kirill Dmitriev has handed this peace plan to Witkov. Witkov has done a Google Translate of this and then said, yep, that's the plan. And then maybe added some security guarantees rhetoric. But essentially, this is entirely a Russian plan. It's been translated. It's then been given to Trump, and Trump's gone, sounds good to me. He doesn't really have much of a clue about what's going on in terms of the finer granular details of this conflict. He goes, sounds good to me. If it gets us a quick peace and we can start doing trade, which is also written into this, because the Russians will know what floats Trump's boat here, what flicks his switches. So they'll include loads of stuff about normalizing the relationship between Russia and the US and restarting trade. Trump goes, yeah, sounds good. And the State Department has nothing to do with this. Marco Rubio's like, what? What's going on? So he put out that cryptic tweet initially because he was trying to, I guess, mitigate against some of the worst dimensions of this. I don't know. But it really does look like this was cobbled together by Russia alone. And then Witkov and his pro-Russian stance says, yep, sounds good to me. Trump says, yep, sounds good to me. Let's get it to the Ukrainians, and they've got to sign this up by next Thursday. Wow. Then it's made sense of even more by this. Google translated from Russian to English. Dmitriev's paw prints are all over this thing, and Witkov is too stupid to even scrub them. This is why there was zero interagency process. Okay, what does he mean by this? Well, there is information to suggest that the plan has basically a load of Russianisms in it as part of the plan that indicate that this really is Russia's doing, that Russia literally wrote this plan themselves and then gave it to Witkov, and either he Google translated it or they just did a rough translation of what they demanded. And that same phraseology has remained in the proposal. So this is Luke Harding reporting that US peace proposal includes Russianisms, prompting questions about authorship of the text, according to analysis. Some of the phrases in the US's peace proposal for Ukraine appear to have been originally written in Russian. In several places, the language would work in Russian, but seems distinctly odd in English. The third point in the 28-point plan reads, quote, it is expected that Russia will not invade neighboring countries and NATO will not expand further. It is expected is a clunky passive construction in English. The Russian version, and he gives the Russian there, ожидается, makes more sense and is a familiar verb form. And other Russianisms that appear to have crept into the text include ambiguities and to enshrine, the two phrases that are weird as used in English there, but actually make much more sense in Russian. The White House has acknowledged Kirill Dmitriev, Vladimir Putin's envoy, wrote the proposal together with Donald Trump's special representative, Steve Witkoff. The pair hammered out the text during a meeting in Miami. Ukraine and its European partners were excluded from the drafting process. Indeed, we have a little bit more here. And Michael Weiss says, as expected, people reading the fine print are beginning to raise questions that the people who cobbled this thing together were too thick to anticipate. Politico reports one senior EU official in Brussels scoffed at the idea and noted that whatever he wants, Trump has no power to unfreeze assets held in Europe. An official from an EU government resorted to colourful swearing to express their dismay, while a senior EU politician said Witkoff needs to see a psychiatrist. Wow. So we have this idea that the US would take 50% of profits from the activity of frozen Russian assets in an American-led reconstruction effort. So this looks entirely unfair in favor of not Ukraine or Russia, but in favor of the US. But we've got language that appears to come directly from the Russian, and we've got Europeans like swearing about this, like disconsolate, and saying Witkoff needs to see a psychiatrist. Michael Weiss says, here is my read of a peace plan and how Kirill Dmitriev played the American media to force this thing into being, with an incompetent White House scrambling to make it seem like this was somehow coordinated and well planned. So then we add to this what we already knew previously, actually, but I'll remind you that Steve Witkoff on Twitter said the leak seemed to come from Kay. And then he quickly deleted it because he thought it was a private message. So what happened? This is my thesis of the events, is that Kirill Dmitriev and the Russians created this 28-point peace plan, essentially gave it to Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff's, yeah, that's cool. Sounds good to me, because he doesn't really care for Ukraine. He doesn't care for a just peace. Passes it to Trump. Trump gives it the go-ahead. Kirill Dmitriev then leaks it, leaks it before the rest of the agencies like the State Department have had a look at this to see whether it's remotely plausible. It then gets leaked by Kirill Dmitriev to the press, or it gets leaked by the Russians to the press, and then the US have to go, yep, okay, that really is the final kind of plan type thing. That is, the plan. Okay, it's the Ukrainians can work on it, but this is essentially it, and we expect them to sign it by next Thursday, by Thanksgiving Day. This has been absolutely played by the Russians brilliantly. And now Trump is like, yeah, damn it, they've got to sign it. The Ukrainians have to sign it. And we'll come to his reactions in a wee while. But essentially, we understand Steve Witkoff has said this has been leaked by Kirill Dmitriev. It's been leaked by the Russians. And then that forces the American hand. And then you've got the State Department saying, well, we've never seen this document before, because before it was able to get interagency input. So it can't be coordinated with the rest of the American government. It's been leaked. And then the Americans have to scramble and kind of post hoc agree that was definitely what they were wanting to be the peace plan. Now, This is the Politico article headline: Witkoff needs a psychiatrist. Europeans fume at Trump's plan to profit from frozen Russian assets. Diplomats and officials react with outrage to new details of the US peace plan, warning it could wreck their efforts to help Ukraine survive the war. Now, there are further complications here that this agreement, or the 28-point plan with America making money out of it, is super problematic for a load of reasons. It could see further lending from the EU not be possible because of that. But also, there's the argument that actually the US has no right to make declarations over what is essentially EU or even Belgium jurisdiction in terms of the Euroclear frozen Russian assets. They can't dictate. The Americans cannot dictate what happens with that funding. Trump's peace proposal includes using frozen Russian assets mostly held in Belgium for US-led reconstruction, with 50% of profits going to the US. The enraged EU diplomats who fear it will jeopardize a proposed EU loan to Ukraine. A senior EU politician said, as we know, Witkoff needs to see a psychiatrist. Shashank Joshi said this as well. So there's another huge problem here, is that in the 28-point peace plan, it seemed to be laid out that NATO will have jets in Poland, but they can't have jets in Ukraine. And of course, the Polish should not agree to this at all. Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, says all the decisions concerning Poland will be taken by Poles. Nothing about us without us. When it comes to peace, all the negotiations should include Ukraine. Nothing without Ukraine, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Shashank Joshi adds, Tusk may be understandably surprised to learn that the US and Russia have cooked up a text which specifically says European fighter jets will be based in Poland without actually consulting Poland. I mean, this is just incredible. It's incredible. Now we're going to get onto some reactions from, first of all, American politicians, and we're going to start with a couple of Republican politicians. This is the Nebraska Republican lawmaker, the representative Don Bacon, who's a very big supporter of Ukraine, saying President Trump's plan to force Ukraine to give up more territory, to cut its army by more than half, to never join NATO nor let foreign troops in its territory is an abomination. Freedom-loving Americans must tell the president that we reject the worst appeasement seen since 1938. The Russians said they respected Ukraine's sovereignty and boundaries in 1994. What makes President Trump think he can now trust Putin? This agreement weakens Ukraine and leaves them vulnerable to new Russian invasions in the year to come. Absolutely on point there. This is so on point. In fact, he has been on BBC News. Let's hear what he has to say here.
Well, it sounds more like the Russian plan for Ukraine. We don't know the details yet. I've only read leaked information, so I can't say that I absolutely know what's in this plan, because all we know is leaked information. But what I'm hearing is not good. I mean, to negotiate with Russia without having Ukraine involved, that smells a lot like Munich of 1938. We've done this before with the South Vietnamese and the government of Afghanistan. It doesn't work. Also, to present this as a fait accompli, as was noted in the leaked information, trying to force Ukraine to take this, that's also wrong. And if the details are true, that this agreement would say, Ukraine, you got to lose all of Donetsk. You're going to have your military cut in half. You can't have any foreign military in your country, and you can't have like diplomatic aircraft in your country. These are the things I'm reading. That is unacceptable. What that does is it makes Ukraine weaker, and it will continue to be vulnerable to future Russian attacks. I find this unacceptable. I see it as a surrender to Russia.
And he's absolutely right. Like, how can you say that Ukraine has to cut its army by huge numbers, and Russia, who's the invading army, they're the aggressors, they're the ones that are more threatening, right? Ukraine threatened no one. They were invaded by Russia, and now Russia and the US stipulate that Ukraine has to cut its army. But Russia doesn't. Russia doesn't have to do anything. It gets to keep some of the territory and more It gets to keep all of the territory pretty much they're taking, bar they will give back the tiny bit up in Sumy and Kyiv and a tiny bit in Chernihiv. But essentially, they get to keep everything else they've taken and get all of Donetsk and the rest of Luhansk to the tune that it's the same, apparently the same amount of land as Luxembourg. And Ukraine has to cut their armed forces. It's absolutely unconscionable. And Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, another Republican here, says, correction, the United States wants Russia's answer to an unconditional withdrawal of Ukraine by Thursday. This Russian drafted propaganda must be rejected and disregarded for the unserious nonsense that it is. The moment requires peace through strength, not appeasement. Today, we have officially notified both the clerk of the House and the House leadership of our discharge petition to force a vote on crushing Russian sanctions immediately upon our return. So he's really strongly in favor, well, in favor of discharge petition. He's very strongly against Trump and Witkoff's position, ergo the American position. Alexander Vindman says, as a Democrat, Trump's collusion with Russia and ultimatum to Ukraine are a dangerous break from America's values and strategic commitments. His approach abandons our allies, sows chaos and around the world, and enriches a small circle of elites at the expense of American security. Trump's reported demand that Ukraine capitulate to Russia is a corrupt scheme that undermines both US and European security. I want Americans, Democrats and Republicans alike, to make their voices heard. Contact your senators and representatives and tell them that you reject this approach. This is about more than one policy dispute. It's about defending our democracy, our principles, and our standing in the world, and securing ourselves from aggression from autocrats towards Democrats. We cannot allow collusion and corruption to define America's role in the world or betray our allies who fight for their freedom. So I'd agree with that wholeheartedly. And if you're American, please contact your lawmaker to let your opinion be known. Gabrielis Landsbergis, now we're going to go to a European response. This is a former foreign minister for Lithuania, who is, I think, a really big voice in support of Ukraine. He said, there is a glaringly obvious message for Europe in the 28-point peace plan. This is the end of the end. We're being told repeatedly and unambiguously that Ukraine's security and therefore Europe's security will be Europe's responsibility. And now it is entirely. If you are a European leader asking your team to book you onto the next flight to Washington to go talk to daddy, please don't. Not without a plan, not cap in hand, not humiliating us all in front of cameras at the Oval Office. Europe is our continent. Our future is decided here, not there. We aren't poor. We have options. We can finally decide to assist Ukraine to the full extent of our very extensive capabilities, restore European dignity and defend Europe. Or we can continue to wait for the miracle we now know is not coming. And like I've said to you earlier today, the calculation here is how much is America's continued support for Ukraine, support scare quotes. They do support Ukraine. There is intelligence sharing, there's satellite usage, there's obviously weapons and this and that. Can Ukraine do without any of that? Or is it that necessary that they keep having to, and Europeans keep having to get on their knees for Donald Trump? Can Ukraine and allies replace those satellites with Japanese and European satellites, for example? Or, you know, French have got good provision, as I say, Japanese, British. Or is there something that the Americans give that is absolutely vital that Ukrainians continue to receive? Does this present an opportunity for Europe to just say, no, it's okay, US, we'll do this alone. We'll continue to support Ukraine. You are not needed anymore. See you later. Now you've got the Polish president here, Nawrocki, who is right-wing populist, who's not a fan of the EU so much, as in he's a bit of a Eurosceptic. He's not a fan of Russia, actually. Not a fan of sort of Germany as a kind of, I think, is he an amateur historian or something? He's a kind of amateur boxer and historian. It's a weird concoction of different aspects. But he has been very much against, Poland being attacked from both the kind of left, as in, west and east, left and right, Germany and Russia over history, right? But the PIS that he sort of represents as his position as president is still a pro-Ukrainian party, even though it's kind of more and more kind of right-wing populist. He, though, personally has been to the White House a number of times and is a big fan of Trump, and Trump has given him the kind of red carpet treatment. So it's quite important that Nawrocki says the following: the emerging proposals to end Russia's war against Ukraine must take into account the fact that Russia is a country that does not honor agreements. Each and every peace plan aimed at ending the war in Ukraine started by the Russian Federation must be accepted in Kyiv. It is Ukraine that's fallen victim to Putin's criminal aggression, and it is the Ukrainians, with the support of the United States and the EU countries, who must have the decisive voice in peace talks. Any arrangements concerning peace and security of Europe can only be made with the participation of all interested parties. The price of peace cannot in any way be the achievement of strategic goals by the aggressor, and the aggressor was and is the Russian Federation. Absolutely on point. Russia can't dictate this. They're the ones that invaded. Those that are involved in this peace process, the Ukrainians, but also Europe, need to have a place at the table. This is, I think, a strong repudiation of the American position. And I'll just throw in another opinion here. This is Virgin's Richard Branson saying this is not a peace plan. I'm in utter disbelief at the 28-point American peace plan for Ukraine that has been circulating in news media. Unless it turns out to be an elaborate hoax or a sinister Russian disinformation plot, it marks the lowest point yet in US diplomacy on Ukraine. For starters, this is not really a peace plan at all, but articles of surrender, legitimizing Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine and the illegal annexation of its territory, while brazenly dividing the spoils of war. There is too much in the shameful document to discuss in detail here. The main takeaways are these. Time and again, it implies that Ukraine and Russia are equally culpable for a brutal war Putin started. It creates no mechanism for accountability and justice, even granting general amnesty for Russia's countless and horrific war crimes. It forces Ukraine to relinquish control over vast swathes of its sovereign territory in exchange for vague and potentially costly security guarantees. It robs the Ukrainian people of the agency of freely choose alliances such as NATO, or to determine the size of their armed forces. And it creates plenty of opportunities for the US to cash in on whatever reconstruction arrangements will be put in place. It's a deal, all right, a great deal for Russia. Putin's negotiators must have walked away from these consultations with a sense of total victory. All their central demands were met, with complete impunity for the horrors they unleashed on the brave Ukrainian people. President Zelenskyy and his European allies should reject this plan and develop a realistic, fair, and feasible proposal of their own, with conditions that are acceptable to Ukraine and respect international law. This is a bamboozle of epic proportions. As if the terms of this plan weren't already terrifying enough, the document also marks a remarkable retreat of US leadership, signaling to Putin's Russia and other authoritarian regimes that violent aggression is perfectly acceptable and, I suspect, even respectable to the US government. Wow. I mean, what rhetoric this from Branson. I never thought I'd live to see the US turn into a proponent of appeasement, riding roughshod over the concerns and interests of its closest allies, while trying to please a brutal dictator who appears to have been pulling the strings all along. In some ways, this feels worse than Neville Chamberlain's failed efforts. At least his heart seemed in the right place. That is an absolute excoriation of Donald Trump there, of the US administration, and of the peace plan. And I think that's one of the most concise and well put together pieces I've read. Now, as I said earlier today, Friedrich Merz, as well as Starmer, Macron came out and said similar sorts of things. He said here, Merz, Ukraine can count on us together with Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer. I reaffirmed our full support for Zelenskyy. We will coordinate closely with Europe and the US, whose commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty we welcome. The contact line must remain the basis for any talks. I also heard today, I need to check this for sure, but Norway might have just off the cuff pledged another $1 billion in military, $1 billion or euros actually of military aid to Ukraine. So Norway's like, no, screw you guys. we're going to pile in and help Ukraine. I need to confirm that, but that's a pretty astonishing development as well. Now, Merz spoke with Trump about the plan for Ukraine, according to a German government spokesman. So apparently there has been a phone call. Quote, it was a confidential and constructive telephone conversation. He said further consultations at the level of advisors were agreed with Trump. However, we're going to listen to what Trump has actually said now. So this is Trump with Brian Kilmeade from Fox News.
It looks like Ukraine has to cut their personnel to 600,000. It looks like they got to give up some land that they have not lost in the war. They cannot join NATO.
They will lose in a short period of time.
The whole of Donbass.
They're losing land. They're losing land.
It looks like
it's just out of hand. Oh, they're losing land. They're losing land. Yeah, at a huge cost to the Russians, and the Russians haven't taken Donbass. And you're just kind of like, yeah, they're losing Donbass. They're losing land. Yeah, we'll give it away. That's fine. It's just, as Noel Report says, Trump couldn't care less. Just listen to how casually he talks about Ukraine losing territory. It clearly doesn't bother him in the slightest.
NATO.
They will lose in a short period of time.
The whole of Donbass.
They're losing land. They're losing land.
It looks like.
So he said they will lose in a short period of time. Look, Ukraine will lose what? The war? Donbass? Everything? Like, it's just, yeah, it's all over. So they've got to sign it by next Thursday. Bish, bash, bosh. Wow. Now, here we have Donald Trump in the White House. Let's listen to him again.
The suggestion that you made, though, was that if he doesn't accept it, that the U.S. would pull back its support for Ukraine.
Okay, if you didn't hear that, there's a suggestion that if Zelensky doesn't sign a peace deal, that the US, Trump, will stop giving intelligence and support to Ukraine. Trump says,
well, at some point he's going to have to accept something. You know, he hasn't accepted. You remember right in the Oval Office not so long ago, I said, you don't have the cards. Don't forget, I inherited this war. I would have never, this war never would have happened. I inherited this
shut
war.
up.
And I thought he should have made a deal a year ago, 2 years ago. The ultimate deal would have been if it never started. That would have been the good deal. That could have been done too if you had the right president, but you didn't have the right president.
Okay, this is insane. It's just insane. So he talks about, I told him he didn't have the cards. Have you not seen what Zelensky, well, Ukraine has done to Russia's hydrocarbons industry? I mean, you can talk about the sanctions you put on with Lukoil and Rosneft, but actually, Ukraine has battered the crap out of Russia's economy. Like, he's got cards, and he still has cards, so that's just abject nonsense. Then he's like, he should have accepted something 1 year ago, 2 years ago. What? Just accept, like, what, just given up? What are you advocating for here, Trump? This is absolutely outrageous. Honestly, Trump is horrific. He's just a horrific human being. Well, he'll have to like it. And if he doesn't like it, then they should just keep fighting, I guess. Incredible. Let's listen to him elsewhere. And by the way, I want to do a video on this interaction with Mamdani. He's got the progressive new New York mayor in the Oval Office, and he's just spent months and months and months saying we're going to do all we can to not let this communist do blah, 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 blah. And he's all lovey-dovey with him, slapping him on the arm, saying, and, you know, he's asked, and Mamdani's asked whether he still thinks Trump's a fascist. And then Trump goes, yeah, you can answer truthfully if you want. He said, yeah. And then Trump's all like happy-go-lucky with him. It's just the weirdest of interactions. Anyway.
I wanted to ask you also about this Ukraine plan.
Yeah.
President Zelenskyy said today that his country would risk either giving up a partner or giving up its dignity. There's been criticism that this deal...
You mean he doesn't like it?
It's unclear. He was sort of...
Well, he'll have to like it. And if he doesn't like it, then, you know, they should just keep fighting, I guess. You know?
The suggestion that you made, though, was that if he doesn't accept it...
So this is a bit before the previous... excerpt that we listened to, and then it goes on where if it doesn't accept it, you know, you're gonna withdraw aid and intelligence. He doesn't really answer that, but it's the idea that here, well, he'll have to like it. He has to like it, and if he doesn't, they're just gonna have to keep fighting. It's just my goodness here. So it's just allowing Russia everything, maximally everything, and all the pressures on Ukraine is completely unacceptable. This idea that they should have done a deal 1 year ago, 2 years ago. Just what would that deal be then 1 year or 2 year ago? Like even more land. At that stage, I get myself angry just contemplating Trump's idiocy here. So that's appears to be Trump's reaction, which is yeah, meh, whatever. You know, he's going to have to like it, and he's going to have to sign it by next week, by the end of next week, type thing. Absolutely incredible. Now, yeah, Britain is getting on and still talking about, well, we know how much we're going to spend on getting our troops out there, which troops there will be, where we'll position them in Ukraine. So Britain is ready to send its troops to Ukraine. Defense Secretary John Healey has said London's prepared to spend over $130 million in deploying and stationing its forces as part of a coalition of the willing in case of a ceasefire. It's probably £130 million. So all the while, like European allies are still getting on and doing what they've been doing for some time and organizing support for Ukraine. As I say, you know, Norway may have come out and said, well, we'll help with a €1 billion of military aid. Thank you very much. Meanwhile, Trump is trumping about and saying his normal stuff there. Anyway, I just thought I would give you a bit more context and some emerging details from there. It's also worth noting, actually, that US peace plan for Ukraine proposed by Trump has received support from the government of Bratislava. This is a grandiose document, said Robert Fitzo, who, of course, is going to be thinking it's the bee's knees. I will support this agreement, he said, adding that the US wants to return Russia to the club of great powers. He also said that the current proposal for Ukraine is worse than the plan that was discussed in 2022, but he still sees it as an opportunity to immediately cease fire on both sides of the front. Slovak Prime Minister has sharply criticized the EU for its previous financial assistance to Ukraine and its intention to use frozen Russian assets to further support the war-torn country. He also accused the EU of lacking a real foreign policy. Anyway, there you go. That's enough from me. Let me know what you think in the comments. It is just astounding. Trump is just happily just giving away Ukraine and also giving away Poland's sovereignty in dictating that European fighters will happily be based in Poland. Thank you very much. And helping himself to the frozen Russian assets that are the jurisdiction of Belgium and the EU. It's just incredible. The whole thing's incredible. But there you go. Take care, speak soon, and please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Thanks.